Now, as you can see, we've got a great group of people here, already well known. In fact, everyone's well known. Ray Dalio from Dalio Philanthropies, Piyush Gupta, who's with DBS, of course, Desmond Quek, also known as my boss, CEO Temasek Trust, Gillian Tan, who is from the MAS and is very much involved in sustainability, looking after all of that there.
Last time I talked to Desmond, he said you're the boss, by the way, Jennifer.
Okay, Piyush, I can tell that it's going to be that kind of a panel already. Now, I know it's lunch and I know you want your appetite to really be flourishing, but I've been asked to share some facts and figures which might, I think, spoil the appetite a little as well. So listen, but barrel through the meal. So if we can get the slides ready. So we're talking about the collaborative action to accelerate impact and sustainability, but there's some facts and figures for you. Now it seems, well, not it seems, it is a fact that the gap to sustainable development that we're seeing is only widening, and that we actually are not going to be on track to fulfilling a lot of the goals. The 2030 goals for sustainable development has reached USD 4 trillion already. And the belief is that just about most of us, and it says here almost all states, will miss the SDG goals. In fact, 85% of the SDG targets are off track, stagnating, or regressing. Stomach churner number 2. There is no sustainability without equity. We know that. We want equity, but yet the regional inequalities do persist. The investment in emerging markets still very much way below levels needed for the SDG in our part of the world. Less than 3% of sustainable finance is deployed in low-income countries, and the allocation for Asia is still very low. And in the next slide, we're told there are opportunities. It's not like there is no money because there are no opportunities. There are lots of opportunities in our region in Asia. And the work Temasek Trust has done with the UNDP SDG Impact Group has highlighted at least 139 investment opportunities in Asia alone. And if you look at the chart that we have there, it's in F&B, in healthcare, in education, financial inclusion, infrastructure, and renewables, all sectors which excite and which we want to be in. So it's quite clear that the current state of doing things is not fit for purpose. We need new models, we need new mindsets, and we actually want the new models of financing to be thought through now. So we've got a very diverse panel here with the different perspectives, and maybe even before we go into the models of financing, if we want to discuss that, let's talk about catalyzing innovation in philanthropy in itself. How do you see the private, public, and philanthropic sectors coming together and playing their part? And Gillian, I'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And a huge hello to everyone, and thanks for having me. So, you mentioned 3 Ps, right? The private, the public, and the philanthropic. Piyush, I've heard him say, let's see if I can steal his talking point. That's the 4th P. There's a 4th P, which is...
That's Piyush.
Yes, Piyush.
The Piyush sector, no. It's the people sector. And actually, if you think about it, double P collaborations, they're not new, right? We've been doing public-private collaborations for infrastructure development for decades. During COVID, we saw very well public and philanthropic collaborations really, come to the fore. So all this is not new. What is new is really bringing a larger number of Ps together. That's one. What is also new is the scale of the issue that we are coming together to solve and the urgency of the action. Jennifer already ruined your appetite with some scary figures. Just to add one more, I hope all of you caught the latest IPCC report. And it was framed by some experts as a final warning for 1.5 degrees. And it's startling, right? About half of our global population already experiences severe water scarcity for at least half the year. half our global population already experiences that. So, you know, innovation, frankly, it's not a nice to have, it's not an option, it's an absolute necessity. But let me get into some specifics on the sort of sectors and what we can do. So given that we're at PASS today, let me focus on the philanthropic sector very quickly, and maybe more importantly, what the public sector's focus should be. Now, I think the philanthropic sector has a hugely powerful role. That's why we're all here. The other sectors, your public sector, your private sector, they're helpful, they're useful, they're important, but they've got rather restricted modalities, right? So governments, you know, like Singapore and many other governments and our agencies, they all have their mandates that they need to abide by. Private players, among some of you, you have commercial concerns. So I'm not saying the other sectors can sit back and relax. What I am saying is that no other party has the flexibility, the levers, and the nimbleness to really channel all its tools, all its levers, all its energy to an unprecedented challenge, which is what we have before us today. And I've seen this in sustainability. It's been really heartening to see so much of our high net worth individuals, our family office community in Singapore and in Asia really step up to the table. And I think we discussed some of it this morning, right? Philanthropic capital is very special. It's targeted, it's nimble, it's, you know, risk tolerant to a certain extent, and it's flexible. So if we can bring that philanthropic capital to the table and have it multiply and crowd in private capital, then Bob's our uncle, and, you know, we'll get a lot more done. The reality is we've seen this, you know, bear out, right, in the West, in many examples, but we need much more done in Asia. So, you know, my team helped me dig out the latest OECD report, and it's startling, right? About 60% of private philanthropy still targets Africa, and developing Asia gets, you know, less than half of that. And it doesn't have to be this way. I look around the room at all of you, and I know that Singapore is more than capable of organizing, convening these collaborations. And what we really need, and I hear this consistently, is efficient and effective structures that can really bring parties together and galvanize what needs to be done. Which brings me to my next point. Public sector. Gillian, you talk a lot. What are you doing, right? Okay, so for the public sector, I mean, we can step in various ways. I mean, the obvious way, obviously, is policy. And by that, I mean tax, I mean grants, I mean incentives, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think where the public sector can really play a role is precisely in providing those platforms that pull ecosystem players together and facilitate organic collaborations. On the MES side, we're doing some of that. You know, we're trying to provide opportunities to interact and opportunities to participate. On the interact side, you know, we work with the Wealth Management Institute, the Private Banking Industry Group, and we launched the IPP, the Impact Philanthropy Partnership. And the idea is really awareness building, bringing together the community of family offices to actually come together and donate and you know, provide giving. And for opportunities to participate, this is actually really key, because what we realized was that while the community is growing, what the philanthropic sector really wanted was trusted platforms to get involved and contribute. And you know, we do that through actually setting up certain funds, including the Asia Climate Solutions Design Grant. We set this up in June with support from the Australian government, from UBS, from Olean, and various others. And this project actually provides early stage grant funding for feasibility studies and proof of concepts for climate adaptation and mitigation projects. We've opened the funding window just for a couple of months. We've had 200 inquiries and 100 concept notes submitted. And you know, I hope to share more about that with you. And you don't need the government to do this. There are ground up initiatives as well, like Impact SG, which Temasek's Asia Center for Changemakers will be hosting. I just wanted to end with one last thing about where the public sector can step in typical Singapore style. Singapore is developing a platform to channel blended finance at scale to green and transition projects in the region. Prime Minister Lee announced this, I think, last week. And this platform is going to be a public-private philanthropic people partnership that really marries concessional capital and commercial capital. It's going to provide solutions across the climate financing capital stack. So wherever anyone wants to come in that stack, any specific spot, we want to be able to accommodate that in our platform. And we'll be working, it's not just a Singapore platform, in fact, it isn't a Singapore platform. We'll be working with MDBs, DFIs, financiers, family offices, and so on. And it's really going to be tailored to needs. So there'll be specific programs for decarbonization, specific programs for established green, emerging green, anything you want, we can accommodate within that broad structure. So, in a nutshell, Jen, I think that's kind of really key. Maybe just one last set of comments, which is, as we think about cross-sector collaborations, how can we be successful? I think we need to be mindful of 3 questions. These are 3 things we need to ask. First, what is my role, right? So each sector has a role to play. What is the thing that only you as that sector can bring? Is it concessionary capital? Is it policy? Is it risk management? The second question is, what is your role and your goal? And this is very important. If we're going to collaborate, we have to be invested in each other's goals. So each sector has to be as committed to achieving its own goals and as it is its partners, or rather the other way around. So one example is coal, right? For the private sector, their obsession might be to quickly phase out coal because they want to get it off their books. But if they don't realize that the public sector also needs a just transition, also needs to take care of jobs and livelihoods, we're going to go nowhere. So both are very important. And lastly, are we achieving real outcomes? We shouldn't be chasing after the wrong metrics. We need to be disciplined and almost ruthless in measuring our outcomes and to know whether we're really getting closer to our goals.
Gillian, just listening to you, I think we're really lucky. The level of energy within government to really tackle all the challenges before us. So, we are very, very fortunate to have you leading the charge there at the MAS. And you rightly said, we each play a role in catalyzing innovation in philanthropy. And Ray, this is where I come to you. The philanthropist, what role do you see the philanthropist playing in catalyzing innovation in philanthropy?
Well, I just look at the panel and we each have a role, and it's very clear, right? So I look at it through my family. Philanthropy is healthy. Philanthropy is healthy for a community, it's healthy for our family, and it's healthy for the people that are helped. And so when I've evolved here, I started coming about 34 years ago. And then I fell in love with the place over a period of time, and we've decided to make it a permanent home of ours and set up a family office. And there wasn't much philanthropy going on. And of course, philanthropy was very important to us and our family over a number of years. So the idea of being able to contribute, to sit down and say, how do we do this thing? And to be able to work in partnership with the parties that are operating on the table, the sectors that we each represent. And so what happens is that it is a healthy activity. It is a healthy activity for the family in terms of what it does and so on. And so as a family office, and I think there are probably many family office people in this room, as you think about the next generation and how that works, I assure you it's a healthy activity, and I want to help you. And then I think about how it works as all of us as a group in terms of the society, because we're lucky. We have wealth. We've acquired wealth. And there are many people and many nature and other parts of that have financial needs. And if we don't recycle it, but we have to do it in a productive way. And so what's exciting to me is, and my family here, is to be able to work with philanthropists who are here to share what the experience is like. In other words, to be in my shoes, because we're in similar shoes as we deal with the multi-generation effect. And how do you do that cost effectively, right? Developing philanthropic skills is as difficult as developing skills in any profession. So anyway, I'm excited to be able to be here and to be part of that development. And also, we offer our time out to be able to help others to go through the experience. Because there are different approaches to philanthropy. You can write checks. You can take initiatives that you build yourselves. You can do it as a family activity. You can find what are your particular passions. How do you know if you're effective? How do you use KPIs to decide, are you wasting money or are you being effective? All of those are things that we can go through together. So I'm particularly excited to do that. And then I must say, I'm very impressed because I think it was just 2 years ago that we started talking about this.
Yeah, indeed.
And I see how far you've gone. So anyway, I'm very excited for those reasons.
Thanks, Ray. And we could only go this far because of wonderful partners like you. I can honestly say, working with your team, Gretchen, Sean, Elaine, and of course Mark and Maxine as well, they have shared so generously and been so patient with us. So that give and take made a lot of difference.
And it's a joy for us.
Thank you, Ray. Piyush, the troublemaker on the panel. The private sector, catalyzing philanthropy. A new thing, or it's always been there?
Well, it's actually not a new thing. There are a lot of private sector, especially families who've been giving for a long period of time. I'll come back to it. But I want to address two things, Jen. One is an offshoot of your first question. So
Sure.
Who can do what? And then a little bit more on what can the private sector do. So I think you think about what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of the Ps. The public sector can orchestrate, it can coalesce, and it can come up with policies to help stuff. Public sector is generally constrained in respect of actually being able to come up with the money. It's not that they don't have it. In a pandemic, we found it and we issued paper. But in reality, public sector money is taxpayer dollar. And it's very hard to make that money flow. So you think about Kyoto Protocol, there's this $100 billion from north to the south in a G2G arrangement. It doesn't flow because no elected government can readily put into the budget, I'm giving $10 billion to Southeast Asia. How do you justify that? So it's challenged from that standpoint. The private sector has the money. Today, we talk about $5 trillion a year. The total investable capital pools in the world are well in excess of that. So the private sector has the money, but it lacks two things. One, it lacks the market infrastructures for that money to flow today. And those market infrastructures are important, whether they're markets, carbon markets, biodiversity markets, other ways for the money to flow. Guess who can help create the infrastructures? The public sector. Through policy, through tax, through capital, through infrastructure regimes. So that's a natural partnership. You can create the guardrails, you create the infrastructure and the policy frameworks that facilitates large pools of money actually flowing in the private sector. But the other challenge the private sector has is it cannot take all the risk. Because finally the private sector is bound, apart from everything else, to a shareholder. And sometimes the risk return is not easy for the private sector to handle.
Indeed.
Guess who can take and simplify that risk? The philanthropic sector.
Absolutely.
So you talk about blended finance. Sometimes the development financial institutions can do that too. So some public money can help to build in the first level of risk. But philanthropic capital can come in very handy to take a level of risk that crowds in the private sector. So it's a good way of thinking about the complementary roles that different parts of the system can play if you really want to move large amounts of money at scale to make impact. Now within that, the thinking on the private sector, I think there are two prisms. One is, it's a big debate. What is the role of the private sector? And without flogging this old horse to death, but the Friedman approach, which is shareholder capitalism, basically argues that the private sector's job is to make a profit, give the profit back to the shareholder, and let the shareholder decide. If they want to make a contribution, it's the shareholder's job. You as an agent should not be doing it. It's a legitimate way of thinking. I happen to be from a different school which says that as an entity, when you get formed as a company, you inherit some rights, but you also inherit responsibilities. And the responsibilities are responsibilities to civil society. You get a legal form. And as a legal entity with a legal form, you actually have a duty of care beyond just to a single stakeholder, which is the shareholder. So if you go down that path, this idea of having a dual profit bottom line becomes quite compelling. That you need to do stuff which is relevant to communities, countries, and societies. By the way, for most private sector companies, I would tell you in the next 10 years, there's a selfish agenda around that. Because if you want to be sustainable and be around for 10, 20, 100 years, you must be relevant to society. Otherwise, people are going to question your existence. So both for selfish reasons, but for conceptual reasons of what is your role, I think private sector has a role to play in broader than just profit generation. The problem is sometimes the private sector can do that and do it well. You know, at DBS, for example, a large part of what we do is the heartlander, the low-income families, and we can build it into our business. But there's some things which are not easy to build into our business. You know, we are a business which is financing, we don't touch everything. So I do think the private sector can also play a role in the philanthropic agenda. Over and above what you can do in your business, could you also actually create incremental resources to sort of supplement corporate philanthropy, in other words. You can do it in a regulated way. India has a regulation which says every company must take 2% of its bottom line and contribute it to CSR. Right. But if you don't do it in a regulated way, I think companies can still do that in a voluntary way. You already pay tax, you contribute to society. Right? So if you mentally thought about saying, in addition to tax, I'm going to take another couple of percentage points and treat this as my social contribution to social tax, you could do that as well. As you know, so recently we at DBS, we announced $1 billion commitment over the next 10 years. That's how we thought about it. That in addition to what we do in our business, what else can we do over and above the impact that we can make through banking? And if you can, put that money to work smartly, that would be a good thing. I do think doing it with people is a better way to do it because, frankly, you've been doing it for such a long time with the family office. I talked to some folks from the Gates Foundation. We don't know how to do this well. So I'd much rather do it with people who know how to do it, and much rather do it with people who know how to make impact than starting de novo in the process.
Right, thanks, Piyush. And, DK, this whole idea of the different parts, different partners and sectors in philanthropy coming together, your response to that.
Yeah, well, I agree with what my fellow panel speakers have already said. Right? And this morning I did say in my opening remarks that it's not possible for any one sector, no one entity to try and steam all of this on their own. And in many ways, if we think about public sector or private sector or even the philanthropic sector, each in their own silos, we're kind of all stuck. It's kind of like a gridlock, and there is no very profound innovation that can come about unless you find new adjacencies, you find ways to unlock the boundary conditions that set each one of these sectors, and find new ways to try and forge the innovation. So I'd say that, because of the nature of sustainable development, which we all know is cross-boundary, and because the issues are so complex and multidisciplinary in nature, we really don't have a choice but to say, let's just work on all of this across sectors so that we can find new space for innovation. I'd say just one more thing, just to add to what I was saying this morning, and it's also important for us to take an ecosystem approach. And I think what we mean by taking an ecosystem approach is that it's really trying to see how we can network around a shared purpose. And this is also where the new empowerment is. Each entity on its own, doing its own thing, coming together to see whether they can look across their shoulders to see where they can self-synchronize, where they can find synergies, where they can find leverage so that we can each build upon the base. And whether it's through better connections, better collaboration, whether it is that we can ride on somebody's effort to accelerate and scale to the next, where do you hand over from one party to the next party who can do better than you can, and where you can learn from lessons from the last person or the last entity that did something in an open, learning, a culturally open and accepting kind of way. These are all ways that we can move forward.
So DK, it's interesting listening to you talk about that as well, because when you joined us, last year or earlier this year to helm TT, you brought in the idea of us as the ecosystem builder. You know, I mean, if it's nothing else, remember that. Build the ecosystem. And this morning, listening to you at the speech you gave many initiatives to strengthen and build the ecosystem, almost stuff that other people don't want to do. But, you know, with you at the helm, you said we have to do it. And of the co-axis idea, a number of the participants here, the audience, you know, came up to me to say, wow, you know, a catalytic capital marketplace? Could you share a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, you do put the nail on the head. It's what's the point of philanthropy if the public sector and the private sector are already either able or willing to do and do better? I think really the space of philanthropy is to try and get down to the really difficult, wicked problems that neither the public sector nor the private sector is able to do. So I think one of the areas, therefore, that we together said that this is a problem. There isn't just not enough funding that's going into impact-driven projects. And a lot of these very early stage projects die prematurely simply because nobody wants to fund them. Either that or the actual startup, the founders don't have the experience to actually take it to a commercial level where it is immediately investable or bankable. How do we help develop this space? And so that's the genesis of co-axis. And I would say that the whole vision of this is really to see how we can exercise philanthropic capital in such a way that it gives all of these high impact ideas, innovations, some scope, some room and runway so that it can get to a level where somebody will pick it up and bring it to commercial success. And the moment it reaches that point, frankly, we don't need to hold their hands anymore because the market will take care of that. And then we can move on to the next better idea. So that's one of the reasons why we set up co-axis, but we also recognize that there's no way that we can do this on our own. We need everybody to make a marketplace, an impact marketplace work. And it can only be successful if everybody plays into this marketplace. And so this particular slide that you see here is a way of saying that there is a whole pool of a pipeline of projects that we want to bring on board in this marketplace. And we're already in discussions with a whole bunch of these people. The Enterprise Singapore, they've got their Sustainability Innovation Challenge. We've got Temasek Livability Challenge. We've got LSE has got an accelerated program. Imperial College, I think, has got a hydrogen accelerator. The Earthshot Prize is talking about how they can move the needle in that. Lots of folks doing all kinds of things. We want to provide a marketplace, bring everybody onto this platform, a digital platform that allows this to be socialized so that the funders, wherever they might be, whether they're an institutional funder, a corporate, a foundation, whether it's an individual or a company that wants to play into this space can do this, and the marketplace provides some kind of expertise, the advisory, the networking, the capacity building, and the training that allows all of this to take off in a much more meaningful way. So this is the idea behind co-axis. The name co-axis, just out of interest, it's really, the co-axis, right? If it's a two-dimensional plane, it's where these two axes come. And you might think about the co-axis in any number of ways. One of the ways which we think about this is impact and returns. And while we start off on the basis of impact, we would be very pleased if the project can take off and generate actual investment returns. But our basic starting premise is that we would like to onboard onto the marketplace impactful ideas, even if they don't lead to a commercial success. There is an impact agenda behind this. And I would say that, therefore, immediate focus, philanthropy. Any returns, we hope, we either think about it in terms of a convertible grant, convertible equity, but more importantly is that the returns can be recycled back in a philanthropic way so that we can start something else with the limited funds that we have to make further impact as a multiplier. And really, bottom line behind the co-axis is really that this is impact driven. And the kinds of measurements and reporting that goes behind this is an important exercise for us, all of us, to also develop. I say whether it's for the donors, or whether it is the funders or the program managers, they can come into play into this space. This slide shows you a bit of an illustration of what we're already thinking about is that web page. It's illustration of how people would populate this. There would be a whole bunch of projects in the climate, health, education, and any other things that you might think of that have social and environmental impact. We would try and tag it with an impact measure or outcome that we're trying to drive at. And people can come into this space and populate it with their ideas. And the funders can come and look at this and say, what would they like to take up? And we try and join the dots that way.
You know, listening to you, DK, Ray, I have to ask you, you're a well-known investor. You understand the benefits of patient capital. But philanthropy is very, very patient capital. I mean, you know, it's asking for so much.
I think that the return on the investment has to be calculated, because money will disappear if you just give it away. When you have a double bottom line, you can compound that. For example, microfinance is something that I'm very excited about. For every dollar I donate to microfinance, $12 over the next 10 years is loaned out to people who are relatively poor people to set up their little businesses to operate that way. What a return on investment, okay? In many cases, I think we have a corpus of money. The foundation has a corpus of money. And we think, well, how should that money be invested? If it's invested in investments that produce excellent returns, that means I can give away more. But if I can get a double bottom line so that that corpus of investing also is able to produce a return, and so the return on investment is something that should be carried through. That doesn't mean all philanthropy should have return on investment, that you can't do that. But when you start to think about the double bottom line investing, it changes everything, because the magnitude of that money that's going around and keeps going is far more impactful. So of course, return on investment should be a consideration.
Indeed. And listening to you, I know, Gillian, you talk a lot about the need to capture data, to be able to measure. And in Asia, we don't have that, right? It's something we need to build on.
No, definitely. I think we need much more data. I think it came up in the discussion this morning as well. On the MES side, we see data as being one of the key unlocks for all this investment to happen. And it's wonderful that I think the Coexist platform will meet that need. And we need to tackle this at many levels, right? So certainly data through platforms like Coexist is one. It also comes down to fundamental regulatory stances towards sustainability reporting, for example. So on the MES front and in the Singapore front, we're looking to develop Project Greenprint, which will really be a sort of platform that brings together all the data that cuts across sustainability metrics, impact metrics. And you know what's really important, I think, is for initiatives like what I've just described to be linked up and synced up with Coexist. Because what we really need is less fragmentation
and
more collaboration and coming together. So
and I know Piyush is big on that whole ecosystem partnership idea. Scaling that for impact is something that you've talked about very often as well.
What I have, which is one of the reasons we're partnering Temasek Trust on the Coaxis platform.
Thank you very
I think
much
that
for that.
2 or 3 things we bring to, we, with Temasek, Dylan's here, launched this Climate Impact X, which is a carbon trading platform. One of the sub-platforms in that is a listings platform. And so we have some experience on how do you create appropriate listings with a degree of accreditation and orchestration. You just start listing anything, the platform is meaningless. So how do you actually put stuff there, which is some credibility and some due diligence even. We were able to help put the technology and shape the technology. So I think we could probably contribute in that way. But most importantly, as a bank, we have clients who want to put money to work, and we have clients who want to use the money in good ways. And therefore, our ability to bring those two together on a platform of this sort is actually quite exceptional.
That's great.
But could we do it by ourselves? Probably not. By doing what he said, put something like this together, get a whole range of different people, I think our own efforts and our own resources get scaled up manyfold.
Yeah. When we come together, it says time's up. I know it's flashing as well. So, DK, very quickly then, co-access, when does it start? When can people get going on this platform?
Okay, we start today. We start today.
I need a bit of leave after this, but yes.
Well, I mentioned we're on a rather ambitious timeline. It is really very bold. We need all the help we can get, find all the partners who are willing to do this with us. We'd like to get a beta version out by April next year, because that's our next Philanthropy Asia Summit. We'd like to show some progress in this. By the end of next year, hopefully we'll have an full operational capability. In the longer term, well, we'd like this to be a one-stop shop for anything impact. In that sense, it's a marketplace for impact. Who knows, what Piyush was talking about, the carbon impact exchange, who knows, one day maybe in an ambition, this could well turn out to be a social impact exchange. Who knows whether that could be something which is credible.
Indeed, many more questions, but the time is up, and I know we need to move on to the deep dive as well. So thank you, Ray, thank you, Piyush, thank you, DK, thank you, Gillian, thank you so much, everyone.